we just want to hear from you. So this kind of format where people have to have the courage to step up and say their thoughts, share their thoughts in front of a whole room full of peers, is a format that favors people by personality and, individual traits, but it also favors people by systemic and structural things that go on in society, right? So those with more power in society are more apt to put up their hand and share their ideas than those with less power. And so I want to strongly encourage women, people of color, people who are younger, earlier in their careers, other people who feel like their voices may not be heard as much. Please stand up, share your ideas. We want to hear them. Aussi, je vais dire la même chose que Daniel a dit plus tôt, que si vous voulez partager vos idées en français, faites-le. There's plenty of people, I think, in the room who speak French. If you understand French, put your hand up. Okay, so if people want to share French thoughts, lots of people are going to understand you. So that's the kind of framing. We want to hear from everyone, and we particularly want to hear from people in their language and their voice that might not always be heard. So here's the question. What's the one big idea that you think that is going to move this forward? This being more environments and health research. So who wants to start us off? We have an hour for this, by the way. So we got lots of time to get into ideas, discussions, thoughts. Alan, if you put your hand up, Alan will bring you the mic. You guys all had 5 minutes to think about your big idea and then 15 minutes to share it with other people.
Can you also put up the Zoom in case people have... Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I see that question is money. But I was just sharing with our group at the end that I'm struck by the fact that conversations like this are happening in different pockets around the country across different actors, and I think that coordinating, collaborating across those efforts would help amplify the voices coming out of a summit like this. So I would really, and that goes back to what we were talking about yesterday about partnerships and relationships. So I would really encourage thinking strategically about synergies across different actors that are interested in and have interest in this space. Thanks.
So who should do that strategic thinking?
Canoe.
Excellent. Okay, I like it. Voluntelling people. Who wants to go next and share their big idea? Or you can also reflect on the ideas other people have shared. Over here.
I don't think this is my big idea, it's the group ideas. And of course, relationship was at the heart of our conversation, but we came also with this idea of one place we can start changing stuff is within ourselves, like attitude in the scientific community, start acknowledging the work we do with partners, but really acknowledging it. Because actually, it's the number of publication that's important. Even here, we present people and we say how many publications that person has. However good they are, we don't know. But so we have to do it internally, like as a group, but also it would help if financing goes with it. Like if you have to report on how many meetings you have with your partners, not only that you have a long list of partners that have never a word to say, but what's your plan? When are you meeting them? What have you done on this side? And stuff like that. So find ways to value this work more. Well, someone even had the idea, which I find very interesting, to cap the number of publications one can make in a year. And I think we should really really think about that one. But still, in the meantime, we can make sure that we have, that value is put on other things than this one. Voila.
Thank you. So if you did have a cap, like once you were getting close, you would really think about what ideas you wanted to put out there in publication.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And we also have people online. So online people, if you have big ideas you want to share, I think we can accommodate that as well. So, yeah, over here.
So someone on our table, Chris Busey, I think, made a comment about how instead of relying, or at least trying to get money from certain oil and gas companies or that sort of thing, and that could be some sort of funding stream. And it made me think of the Health Effects Institute based in the US. So the HEI does a lot of air pollution work, and all of the research is fully funded by the automobile industry. So maybe something like that could be a way where we can get that extra funding in order to increase capacity of environmental health research in Canada.
Excellent. And so if there was funding coming like that, it would have to go through a third party body, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the industry that's distributing it.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, Karen's got an idea. And then, yeah, one of you, then the other.
In our team, we basically resonated with some ideas that others have shared in the summit of the development of a declaration post-summit that pushes for interdisciplinary environments and health research, and also aligning with the requirement for money. And we also discussed that there have been some alternatives being discussed, like establishing a cross-cutting theme on environments. But then in that case, we would miss a little bit of the relational piece of organizing priorities, creating events like these from time to time to connect with each other. So that piece perhaps would not be developed if we have a cross-cutting theme instead of an institute to bring us together. And we also talked about celebrating our accomplishments. It's been 5 years of this particular initiative, and this should be celebrated. And for next steps, identifying some nexus areas and policy windows to keep working on these issues. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Carlos. Karen, did you have something else? No, I was volunteering. Oh, okay. Great. Other ideas? And you can have more people from the same table. That's fine. No, okay.
Just quickly to add on to that, the declaration of post-summit for an institute, our interdisciplinary environmental health research institute, but with the idea to create positive transformative change, right? So it has a goal, a mission, is to create change.
Right. Yeah. So state that explicitly. Thank you. I think Chris had a, yep.
Chris Busey, Simon Fraser University. Just to put some of Amira's comments in context, I was kind of joking in jest that I know a good place where we can find, roughly about $2 billion a year, which is in the form of tax incentives to the oil and gas industry. And so, we have opportunities to institute some very real polluter pays in ways that might fund solutions-oriented research. In the wake of that, the one thing that is on your campaign, it's just a reminder, Trevor Hancock mentioned this, there's a draft sitting in front of all of us, and in the spirit of the first comment that was made around building a coalition and building an alliance and broadening the circle of engagement in this conversation beyond the four walls or the two walls, one wall and a curved wall in this room. I'd encourage you to reach out. My contact information is on that. If you're keen to join a conversation, even if it's just to add your name and a signature to an initiative that is seeking to build a sustainable funding revenue for the research, the very excellent research that's happened in this room, by all means reach out. Happy to discuss next steps with you folks and continue the conversation beyond the summit.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, over here. Oh, yeah. You and then you.
All right, thanks, Series. This is all really fantastic. From a more grassroots level, I think that a lot of Canadians realize that we're basically flying blind through an environmental crisis. or a series of environmental crises that are escalating. So I think that grandmothers and grandfathers and parents and teachers and there's a broad constituency that recognizes that we've got to try to figure out where we're going and redirect and, you know, navigate this in a much more intelligent fashion than we are now.
Thanks, Megan. And just on that, I can't think of any of the names right now, but there are mom groups and grandparent groups of people who are worried about the future of their children on the planet. And so there's groups out there, advocacy groups that can be joined. And prevent cancer and many others.
So Nazim Muhajirin from University of Saskatchewan. I think I'm just going to reflect on 1 or 2 points that we discussed in our group, and consistent with what I was thinking as well. So just picking up on a number of different, I think that's a bit of a theme we are developing here. EHSI in the last 5 to 6 years have been highly successful, and are we actually at a funeral of EHSI? Are we at a wake? Or are we actually talking about how to keep this initiative moving forward? If not in the same way, that EHSI was conceived and implemented in the last 5, mind you, during COVID-19, it actually moved forward in spite of, once in 100-year pandemic, So are we going to succumb again to this, what we do best in the country, a whole bunch of pilots, piloting good novel ideas and letting it die just at the moment when it needs to be sustained, at least for a few more years, and bring it to more of a maturity. So I think this is what we were kind of talking about, one thing. So we were talking about how do we sustain this initiative? Is it a new institute, or is it embedding the focus in many of the institutes? We also talked about the problem of the challenge of how do we keep the data useful for people, not only in individual researchers, but how do we actually deposit it, how in a national centralized repository, so that this is public data, collected through public money and public data. How do we actually deposit it into, and where should we do it? So we talked about Canoe. We talked about the Pan-Canadian data strategy, maybe as being one of the solutions perhaps going forward. We haven't talked too much about that initiative, the Pan-Canadian data strategy. I think it is important. It's one of these things that is coming out of the pandemic, the emergence of the pandemic. And so those are 2 ideas. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. So data, how do we keep the data housed and useful in the future? And how do we actually fund EHSI or the same initiative under a new name, a new brand, a new name going forward?
Yeah, great.
Anything
Thank
else?
you. So we have a couple of people online. Elizabeth, do you want to share your big idea?
Sure, thanks. So I'm Elizabeth Galarno. I'm a research scientist at Environment and Climate Change Canada in the Air Quality Research Division. So I was in group 1, so we decided at the end of our discussion that we would just speak up sort of popcorn style to add to the discussion. But something that came up a couple of times while we were talking was leaning on or learning from some previous efforts that have been successful in some of these, dealing with some of these concerns. And what came to mind for me is the Northern Contaminants Program, which has been really successful for decades now in terms of driving scientific research, but also ensuring that communications and community level interactions are incorporated within the whole program. And that seemed to be a big gap that we identified in our discussions. So we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. There are some successful programs that have tackled some of these issues successfully.
Thank you. And Blake, you also wanted to share an idea.
Yeah, thank you. I'll build on Elizabeth's point, actually, because I think one of the things that we could be doing better is documenting and raising awareness around what works. We see this with our students who feel so demoralized after years of study about what's wrong with the world and how it's going to hell in a handbasket. And the media is not terribly good at collecting these examples, but I think the more we can shine a spotlight on what's working and what the success stories in this area, the better. And I think that'll help us also with a bit of a crisis of imagination about, we're so focused on what we don't want that we've forgotten to articulate what we do want, what kind of world and society we want. And I think that has to be part and parcel of our work and not just fighting against what we're trying to stop or mitigate.
Thanks, Blake. Okay.
Hi, Ryan, CIHR Institute of Circulatory and Respiratory Health. I wasn't able to be with the discussion, so this may have come up, and I apologize if it's been discussed. But over the last couple of days, hearing the different domains of interest of this group, beyond the research, there's advocacy. We heard about other sources of revenue that may require third entities to support, trying to figure out how to fit within an existing structure like CIHR or other. I'm wondering if there's been a discussion around an opportunity, and I don't know what exists broadly in this space, but to develop a not-for-profit. And that not-for-profit would then be able to define by the group. You would be able to seek resourcing that enters a not-profit. You could have an advocacy arm. You could have a support arm. You could have a marketing arm. You could have a number of things that could bring to your imagination and not limited by existing structures, right? CIHR will limit you to health, right? SHRC or something will limit you to that particular arm of activity. And I wonder if a not-for-profit or some sort of foundation or something might allow you to define what that entity looks like. And I'm not sure if it's been discussed. I've seen it happen in other spaces. It's not easy, but it provides broad opportunity for the group to define what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, here.
Just want to build on Blake's comment. I think you've probably heard these cliches before, but I'll use them. We have a disease care system, not a health care system. We know more about the causes of disease than we know about the causes of health. And so we got the world going to hell in a handbasket, but we've never defined what a healthy world would look like because we're so focused on finding the problems with the world. And I think there's a lot of great solutions that we've kind of talked about, but we're tending to focus on the negative. And I think a major thing in changing people's perceptions about environment is saying, what could we become and how much more healthy could we become if we did these and these steps? As opposed to telling everybody, don't eat this, don't do that, this is going wrong, we're causing problems here, we've got to solve this, but we're not really solving it. We have to start creating a dream of what a good world would look like and try to achieve that as opposed to saying what are all the bad things. So I concur with Blake. I think we need our messaging that goes more positive in the outcomes. So.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Oh, good. Margot.
Thanks, folks. I was able to circulate a little bit, but I had a really memorable conversation here with Elder Brakupe, and we were talking about the central idea of having the courage. It's really following on with the crisis of imagination and going beyond into the connecting and amplifying what works idea and the healthy pathways, which is for everybody to reconnect and to be themselves with their own fundamental recognition of the interconnectedness of things. And that is actually part of all of us, and we forget. And then we think we need to seek permission somehow. But that actually everybody here is operating and knows those connections. So we need to not wait for permission to make them, but to just be ourselves and the gifts that we have to make those connections. And the comment that was just made, make the connections that tell about a healthy future, make the connections that have imagination, that can take us in a way that reflects those fundamental connections to ourselves, to each other, to the living systems we depend on, all of those things. So that was the one big idea that came from this chat.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Margot. So we've got some more online people wanting to weigh in. Kelsey.
Hello. I just wanted to share some more ideas that came up in our group. So we also discussed supporting the call for the Institute for Research on Environment's Health and Wellbeing that's been put forward. And then within the Institute, including support and training for risk communication while also showcasing the wins, support for developing partnerships and for early career investigators. And then we were also talking a little bit about having funding available to understand transformative social change, and also for projects that are in between the small development grants as well and the really large projects, so kind of finding that middle ground and looking for how funding can support relationship building with communities to be able to complete participatory research. So I think it's a lot of themes that have been shared that we talked about too.
Thanks, Kelsey. And Tim online.
Thanks. I was in group 1 also, and just wanted to mention one other item. I believe it was Marissa earlier today mentioning that the reason her organization was successful was because the COVID-19 pandemic was an emergency. And, we just need an emergency. But of course, we already have an emergency. It was declared by Parliament in 2019 that we have a climate emergency. But referring to several comments this afternoon, maybe it's not so much that we need the emergency, but we need the story of the emergency. We need a story that is compelling to the public to generate the interest in this well-being society. And obviously, as was mentioned, we need to be able to define what we mean by a well-being society and create that story that feels like an emergency because the planetary limits that have already been exceeded in Canada at least several times is truly an emergency. It just doesn't really feel like one unless you happen to be in the Sahel or your grandmother was one of those who died in the apartment building in New Westminster from the heat dome.
Thanks, Tim. Anyone else want to share a big idea or a medium-sized idea that we would take that also? Hang on. Chris already had one, so let's go to Daniel and then we'll go back to Chris.
Sorry, Alan, I'm taking your job. Thanks. One small to medium idea that our group talked about at the institutional level at CIHR was to try to figure out a mechanism where it would be easier for CIHR to provide ongoing funding for grants that are large in scope. They talked about why that's not a thing that they can do now and why that's difficult, but that's not to say that that's not a possible thing that CIHR could have a structure for. Complications and equity considerations and things to think about, but that's maybe a small to medium-sized things that, without creating a new institute, without all these other things, like, could we think about a mechanism at CIHR where they'd be able to provide continuing funding to grants somehow? And we said we were going to invent a grant call that was called "Keep the Big Grants Going" call, And it would just be like you have an existing grant of a certain size and a certain thing, and then you can apply to that call to keep your big grant going. So that's a small to medium thing, maybe.
There also might be a case to keep small grants going.
I'm glad Dan went first. Yeah, building off that, I'm going to speak for a couple of our group members who had unfortunately jet off, so apologies for going twice. But to build on this idea, there's pragmatic constraints I think that CIHR is operating under. We tried to ask the question, how do you do this work within the existing structures, just like it sounds like this table over here did. One of the ideas that we shared was this idea of priority pools, something that CIHR already does, most tri-council agencies already do. Why not have priority pools under specific grant calls that actually have an environmental focus? Part of the challenge there is that most of those priority pools fall within one of the 13 institutes. So C above RE need for an institute. But there's opportunities there, I think, to work within that structure. The other thing that we talked a lot about was the opportunity that we heard from Senator Kushner this morning. We do have a new bill that's trying to revitalize our environmental protection bill. We spent a lot of time talking about the challenges that are associated with that, but it is an aspirational nature. There will be budgets attached to it. It will give us a mandate to do more of the good work that we're already seeing in this room. So it's something else I think that we could potentially lever, at least strategically.
Thank you. Yes, Lise has a thought.
Actually, it's not my big idea. Just wanted to share something, concept that's getting a lot of airplay in Quebec. It's called la santé durable, or sustainable health. And in fact, the FRQ, the provincial granting agency, has funded a research center around sustainable health, and also more recently a research chair. In the 8 dimensions, it's actually quite an overarching concept that health goes beyond disease conditions, and the different domains would be, and I'll try to do this as simultaneously translating, biologic and genetic characteristics, lifestyle behaviors, social and personal competencies, standard of living and education, life settings, environment, health and social services, political, economics, and society. So it sounds to me that there might be some interesting links to be made there, because this idea that everybody has been talking about has been put under the label of santé durable, or sustainable health, which might actually be an interesting way to pull it all together. Voilà.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Lise. Pema has an idea at the back.
Hi, this isn't from my group discussion. It's just an add-on to what Lise just said. So I think that's really interesting and cool, and I think it could be more explicit about some of the structures behind what puts standard of living in a certain place for certain people. And so I think I would really like it if some of those concepts, and if we're going to be broadening concepts and taking the opportunity to create new ways about how we talk about health, that that we consider, I think this started to be talked about in one of the panels today, where we were talking about commercial determinants and other big structural drivers and value systems. And so I think that as a field, we need to be, and definitely Nancy mentioned this morning, be better and more comfortable about naming structural racism, be better about naming different ways that manifests, and look around each of the rooms that we're in, each of the teams that we're in, and see who's there and who's not there. And that includes who's here today. So.
Thank you. Yes, right over here, Alan. And so, by the way, if you have thoughts about ideas that other people are sharing, that's welcome as well.
Yeah, so our table hasn't gone yet, so I'll just try to share some stuff that we had at our table. But I think the biggest things that came across in our table was really trying to establish the correct infrastructure and framework to allow this type of research to continue. And so I know most people here mid-career are well-established, but looking beyond that and really kind of starting people out early. So I'm going to borrow what Tracy said, but as early as you can, really just establishing the infrastructure needed so that the next generation of scholars and researchers can really continue this work and kind of keep that continuity going. So that we can keep kind of working towards that, dream of what a healthy world looks like.
Thank you. Jeff, Yeah, and then Tate.
Yeah, thanks. I want to pick up on that because I really like that one, and I was just jotting notes down about something about that, about inspiring youth to be involved in this area. There are also, of course, some of the parts of our population that are most disturbed by what they're seeing and hearing. So I would say the big idea would be for all of us when we're done here to find a venue where we can reach out to youth in our schools or whatever it is, and, and offer your expertise to go speak to them. I'm hopeful that my good friend is a physics teacher, science teacher at high school. I think his class has been watching some of this, and I'm intending to go to talk to the class afterwards. So, all of us go, talk to, our youth in schools, and, and with that positive spin of, we can do things about it, and also with the, the promotion to say, and get involved in this area as part of your interest in your career and your work.
Thank you. Yeah, over here.
I think to continue building on that idea, one thing that our group was talking about is one way to build connections with our community partners or advocacy groups, things like that, is to utilize either different funding streams or different academic programs to have more an interdisciplinary focus, rather than having trainee programs being very specific to one area, trying to get them to have some sort of interdisciplinary, working on multiple different areas because of the connection, and we see that in this room. The similarities in what we're looking at were just maybe different outcomes. But also, the possibility of having more embedded programs, so having individuals more embedded in our community partners, so that they can be the linkages between us, so that can help us communicate what we're trying to do, communicate what they're trying to do, and that might help build these bridges and solidify these partnerships, so that we can continue and they can help us make the change that we want to make. Rather than, as we've talked about, just focus on the problems, but actually actualize them.
Thank you.
So we had a couple of ideas that I would put at the more medium and little. And Nancy, you're still here, but one of the folks that was at our table said that getting the funding was transformative for him personally, that it was actually, he's a different person as a result of having to work interdisciplinary, being forced initially, he said, but now seeing the value. So that, we look for big change, but sometimes small change that then engenders small change in someone else and moving that forward. So that he transformed me as a researcher and as a person. People talked about that it laid out their career, influenced their career, and that they were able to achieve tenure track positions as a result of this. So, intra-system is important transformation too. So while it was transformative in its vision for the world, but we heard that. One thing I don't think has been said is that we need a tagline for how to talk about this. And so some of the smart people that are younger than me in the group looked at, what do you call it? Chat GPT, right? And they quickly asked it questions, but healthy trio, people, pause, and planet, like PAWS. So looking for that tagline, that short way of bringing people together towards something that's good and achievable and positive, I think is an interesting thing. Our health begins where we live, work, learn, and play, to make the notion of environment more present. So I was thinking about when you were speaking, my son's a physics teacher and a science teacher. I think talking it up to him, introducing, making some connections both at that personal and local level, but having a bit of a tagline or some way, a catchy way of doing that. And then I was hoping that you would speak to your big idea, because I think you have a really good one. You had two actually about talking to undergraduate, but even high school students about sharing research, and then your data bank one. So
Yeah, so
we talked about a couple of things. The first point I brought up was in relation to communication. I think it's really important to teach younger people how to communicate, and I initially thought about undergraduate students. And this idea came from my TA experience over the past couple years and seeing how students in the scientific field sometimes struggle to communicate their research. You either have like really academic students that are very jargony in their writing, or students who struggle to, master flow and sentence structure and that kind of thing. So I think creating mandatory course material at the undergraduate level and in teaching students how to communicate not just to other academics, but to the general public is really, really important, because when the general public knows what's happening in the science community, everyone is doing better, I think. So that's something that I think is a medium to big sized idea. And then the other idea I had was just a result of what I heard over the past couple days and my own conversations that I had with other people at my table, and that's just like an online, really easy to use data repository. And I think someone on that table already mentioned something similar, but having just a really easy to use data repository where if you've done research funded by NSERC or some other governing body, you just put your data online. And I think if we're able to easily access and Google what other researchers have done and access that data with no barrier, it just makes it easier to understand what other people have been doing. Because I've heard a lot of like, oh, you're working on that too? Like, let's talk about this later and that type of thing. But having that type of online search engine that's managed, I think would be really helpful. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a shout out to Deanne Shepard, who's online, who keeps putting up hearts or thumbs up or things in the chat in response to what she's hearing. So thanks a lot, Deanne. We are seeing your reactions. Anyone else want to share an idea or build on something? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. One of the ideas that came up in our group was about embracing complexity. And we were thinking there are some tools out there that can help us grab this complexity and sort of reduce the ocean into something that is manageable. And so we are thinking about maybe we do our own participatory research and launch some fuzzy cognitive mapping workshops where we can sort of map the complex system we're talking about. And then it becomes a tool both for increasing connections as well as to structure ideas, structure the institute, and move forward.
Yeah, I'm just going to stitch together a couple thoughts. Someone over here mentioned ChatGPT. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. It'll be a bit of a snowball, I think. What comes from that, I think earlier this morning the senator mentioned misinformation. I think, yeah, some of those tools have the opportunity to be abused. Some of those, powerful AI systems, and I think that's something to keep our eyes on. As a way to mitigate that, in terms of trying to provide a good idea, I think some of the ideas are table floated around education. And actually, just to toot Canoe's horn a little bit, I think we do a good job of posting webinars. Obviously, as a lead up to this, there were a number of good webinars summarizing the research that's been done. But I think Canoe and sort of our platform has an opportunity to build on that as far as, I think, providing, we float around the term certification, or some other type of training that can be useful for either folks from, across an age range or across disciplines. We also heard this morning about the clinicians and physicians and how there's folks just like us in other rooms talking about these same things. I worked in environmental science for a long time. There's a lot of people in ecology and biology who just might not connect their work to health. And I think Canoe is well poised to sort of be the center of a conversation, like I say, across disciplines and even age groups for folks who are maybe looking to, yeah, upgrade their skills or get up to speed with things like AI. So I think lots of opportunity there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, is there someone? Yeah, okay.
Just an example maybe of teaching communication to undergrads in Quebec. Students from our program, well, grad students and graduated, in fact, created a program for engineer that's now taught to all engineer at Polytechnique, in which they learn it's on interpersonal communication and teamwork, and especially because in the opinion of the people at Polytechnique who wanted to have communication classes, engineers have to work in teams, in interdisciplinary teams, and they didn't know how to do this. So now there's a program, and they're forced to follow that type of courses that were created for them. So it's really customized for their practice. So that's something.
That's something. Yeah, thank you. All right, last chance. Anyone else want to share an idea? Well, thank you all very much. That was great. I think another round of applause.